just before you, I don't know if you hear me before, but I was introduce you to the audience here. First of all, thank you for joining us, and I want to tell you guys a little bit about Mark. Mark is the chairman of the CDN Alliance and is also the CEO of Excel, which is a media streaming consultancy agency that help to media streaming companies to go better with strategy, business, and technology. And Mark, you are in the industry for over like, I don't know, 15 years since
For
2000 in
CDN
the
15
CDN.
years, for streaming almost 25.
25 years. Okay, so we probably like you got the best mission to speak about the future of the edge industry. And so again, thank you for joining us. We will try also to put the video during the show. And we have also here with us Edward Tsenovoy, which is the CEO of iRiver and co-founder. Uh, Edward is a multi-CDN advocate and is leading in the past the team who built edge computing Akamai. So thank you, Eddie, for joining us as well. And let's begin. So, Mark, I would like to ask you, what was the trigger that made you to decide to build a CDN Alliance?
Okay, so I've been in the industry for 15 years, and the CDN industry is like 25 years old, 27 technically, but so I'm in the business for more than 15. And what triggered me being in the industry for such a long time is that there was no cooperation in the industry itself. A good example, especially if we look at the river, the fact that there are no standards in relation, for instance, to multi-CDN is a very good example. There's no cooperation, and there are a lot of challenges that we still have as a CDN industry, even though basically the CDN industry is making sure that the internet works. I mean, if you think away CDNs from how the internet works today, you take away all the CDNs, basically nothing works. So that's how important CDNs are for the internet that we use today. But there is no industry body, there is no cooperation with each other, there is no organization with other parts of the internet ecosystem, and that needed to change. So that's where we said, okay, let's put our heads together. How can we make this work?
Nice. And how many joined to the Alliance so far?
We're almost at 20 members right now.
Okay, that's very cool. Um, What are the changes that we are going to see in the CDN industry in the next 5 years, according to your experience and for someone that knows the industry from very close distance?
Yeah, so I mean, if you just look at the last, let's say, roughly 3 years, a lot has changed already, and I don't think that's gonna stop. Let's put it that way. So the biggest changes I see, there's one fundamental change that I think will happen is that there will be basically two types of CDNs that I see in the future. I call them the full-fledged CDNs. So those are the CDNs that offer delivery, offer security, and offer edge compute capabilities all at once, and have those integrated with each other, make them work together with each other, etc., etc. A good example of this, of course, are Akamai, Cloudflare, Fastly in some degree, etc. And then you have what I call, let's say, the delivery CDNs. Let's put it that way. So those are the CDNs that focus primarily on delivery only, or primarily on delivery itself. Don't have the full-fledged option, but focus on the delivery aspect, which is just a lot of bandwidth. It's a lot about cost savings. The infrastructure is based on delivery, where the infrastructure based on full-fledged is primarily based on edge compute, where they then also do delivery on, where they also do security on. So the infrastructure is different, the business models are different, the type of use cases where it's used for is different, and that's the split that I will see in the future. So that's one major shift that I think will happen. And the other major shift is, and I think everybody see this coming, is there's got to be a lot more edge compute capabilities within CDNs. Again, they are distributed by themselves already, much better distributed than, for instance, cloud infrastructures. So they can actually use this to apply edge compute on. means much more applications, cloud-like applications can run on edge infrastructures within CDNs.
Can you give us? Yeah, go ahead.
From my experience, I think that also hyperclouds will play a more significant role in the edge market compared to the original CDNs. How do you see it? How do you think the hyper clouds development will impact on the edge?
Well, and what do you define by hyperclouds? You mean like distributed clouds?
AWS, Google,
These guys. Yeah, so
Azure.
they will move. They will. So there's a interesting thing going on. Right, Akamai bodily node, as an example, right, to focus on edge compute, embed in edge compute within their distributed architecture that they already have, meaning they are moving into the cloud area. Can you see me? Yeah. Where cloud infrastructures are also moving into, let's say, the more CDN bits as well. And you see this with Amazon. I mean, Amazon basically is the number 2 with CloudFront on CDN side right now. Google Media CDN, Google Cloud CDN are also moving in that space. So it's getting closer to each other in that regard, between CDNs on one end and the cloud infrastructure on the other side.
And from one of the ideas behind putting the compute on edge is kind of try to take use cases that today going directly to the cloud and move them closer to the end user, moving them to the edge. Do you think that we will see more and more use cases moving to the edge, or what will be the barriers from your perspective?
Yeah, there will be more of them. It really depends on the use cases, right? So there are use cases where centralized compute is fine, right? There will be use cases where having it more on the edge is better, or having it hyper distributed is better. The more, if you look in terms of personalization, and especially if I then also look at, I hate the word, but Gen AI as an example, and you do this on a personalized basis, that kind of stuff, that's where you want to have the edge used much more than it is right now. We're not there yet, but slowly it is moving in that direction. But they're not, there's, as far as I've seen, if you look at hyper distributed, right, and you can even go deeper into MEC with having edges into ISP networks, those use cases, there's no magic use case yet. So the killer app has not been found yet in that regard. But there are more and more use cases that are coming in that direction.
Okay. So my next question is about what we are experiencing in the last 22 months. 3 CDN providers, major ones, has been went down. Was Lumen, StuckPath, and Edgio.
Yeah.
I'm guess that some of the people here in the audience were maybe one of their clients as well. How do you explain that? What is your reasonable, like, what is your reason for that? How do you explain it to yourself?
Yeah, I mean there are different reasons why they collapsed. Let's put it that way. All 3. So if you look at StackPath for yeah, if you look at them, for instance, then their issue is they bought a couple of different companies, never really integrated them. I don't think they got enough business, let's put it that way, in that regard, and they didn't really have in my opinion, a focus to go. So that's why they really didn't really were able to gain enough traction, even though they got, I think, 400 million of investment in total. Lumen, they had an issue with, there was a decision based on C-level, basically, right? CDN for Lumen was less than 1% of their whole business. So they said, we'll go back to the core, we're going to get rid of CDN. On top of that, they sold 2 networks, one in Europe, one in Latin America. Normally, their business model was to create CDN services. They sell the CDN services, and then they sell the traffic that they need to deliver to the ISPs as being transit. So they had two ways on where they made money. But once they sold the networks in Europe and in Latin, they lost that benefit of getting business on the transit side. So all of a sudden, that became a cost for them. So then the CDN use case for them made even less sense next to the whole C-level issue. So that's the reason why Lumen basically eventually stopped. And Edgio, I mean, that was Edgecast and Limelight merged. Both were already crypto companies, let's put it that way, at that point. And that didn't go well in trying to merge those together, in my opinion, with some bad management decisions, in my opinion, that went through it as well. But overall, of course, as part of all this is also, at least on the delivery side, is a part of the commoditization that is happening in the market itself.
Mark, do you think, yeah, from my perspective, I think that we are experiencing kind of a generation replacement in the edge market. So when we are looking on these three names, there are these networks with us with different previous names, but very long period of time. I think all these networks were in place even 10 and maybe even 15 years ago.
Yep.
My feeling that the generation is changing, and we will see new spirit of edge solutions, maybe in a different formats, in the market coming in these days. What do you think? Do you think that we will see more young kind of challengers that will go and enter to the edge space?
I think there were the edge players coming, right? Again, if I speak from the media perspective, a well-known player there right now that is very focused on edge specifically is Netscape. So they're well known, having really an edge focus on how they make delivery. So yes, those new type of players are coming. I mean, of course, you have edge companies in general that really focus on edge compute only. Don't do really CDN delivery as part of it, but just pure edge compute. So yes, those are happening. And you have all kinds of different startups. I mean, I've seen startups that build edges in city centers, etc., trying to really have that kind of type of fine granularity delivery. So yes, they are coming. There are new initiatives, but there's not a big one that I've seen that is really taking off in that regard. I think the best one that I still see so far in the edge place that is really making waves on what they're trying to do, and again seeing where they're heading is Akamai with the node.
There is anything that those clients who was the clients of those three major CDNs that just been shut down. Is there anything that it could do in retrospective, or things that it could do in order to avoid that or get prepared for this day? Because, like having a migration in a very short manner, and some of those CDN announced about themselves shutting down in a very short time.
Yeah.
What could they do to just avoid it or get prepared for this day? Is there anything they could do?
Well, of course, I mean, the obvious one, run a multi-CDN, right? So if you have two or more, it's much easier to, if one has an issue for whatever reason, by the way, go bankrupt or whatever, doesn't really matter what the reason is. But if you have multiple of them at the same time, and again, you see this in multi-cloud strategies as well, right? Big companies have multi-cloud strategies for a reason. They can't rely on one. The same is with CDN. Again, if you look at the media segment where I'm from, primarily, 60 to 65% of all the broadcasters or media companies have a multi-CDN strategy by default. Reason, they can't have the risk that they rely on one and that one is not out. I mean, if you go back to regular, normal if you run a company, right, and let's say you run a hospital as an example, they make sure that they have water, that they have electricity for what reason it goes down. Reason being, it's core of what they do. If it's core of what you do, you want to make sure that you have a backup plan. Period. Whatever reason. That's just common sense in business in general. For CDNs, a lot of people do not think that way, and they should. Right? If you're depending on a CDN, you need to make sure that you have a plan ready, a disaster plan, or how you want to call it, to make sure that you're able to switch quickly, be able to migrate quickly, et cetera, et cetera. That's just the nature of a business. But people often see CDN not as a core. But if let's say you're an e-commerce company, and you're down for a day because you need to migrate all of a sudden, and you lose 1 day of revenue and the related margins, you can make the math. Okay, what if I had 2 of them or 3 of them, and I would have those? What would have been better? That's just common sense. It's a business sense what you need to do, and people have to look at it that way. Also for CDNs, if it's critical, you need to make sure that you either run a multiple at the same time, or you have an easy way to replace in case of need.
Mark, one of the experience that I experienced with the last, Edgio shutdown is that customers that were on Edgio, part of them, it was a huge big deal for them. It's
Yep.
they got so extreme short notice. In some cases, they even again didn't even get official notice about this shutdown. They had during their holidays period a few weeks to kind of rebuild their infrastructure solution, and they were in panic. It's kind of a feeling that I think that we as industry we should see how we can, maybe even in CDN Alliance, how we can create a better, and more stable a platform as an industry that will not put our customers in so embarrassing situation that really impact on their business, because CDNs, vendors, they can shut down. It's totally fine. But as an industry, we must find a better solution how we are keep the businesses of our customers running and allow them to rely more and more on the edge. Because if we want to build more things on the edge, we couldn't do it when the customer see that he might have 2 weeks to find the totally other alternative.
Yeah, correct. So, I mean, there are 2 main elements that I see. One is just regular business practices in general, right? If you stop your company or whatever, you're being acquired or anything like this, there needs to be ample time for people to think about it, et cetera, et cetera. That should be just a business practice in general, right? And that's with any company. I mean, there is difference in how StackPath, Lumen, and Edgio did it, right? So if you look at Lumen, Lumen gave their customers more than enough time to migrate. That was not an issue. They were just winding down their business, right? Edgio was different because it was a Chapter 11, et cetera, et cetera. They only had a certain amount of time. They got runway for a certain amount of time to make sure that the infrastructure was able to run. So they were limited in time just because of the funds. That's it. Nothing they could do different there in that regard. StackPath sold off most of their customers to Akamai at the time, and had a similar, at least for the CDN, right? I'm not talking about the edge part of it because that went a little bit different, but the CDN part at the time, that went okay in terms of potential migration. But again, this goes back to business practices in general. Again, if you go back to an electricity company, if an electricity company would just pull the plug at some point, we'll have a lot of issues. So business practice is one. Secondly, it goes back to standards, right? Now it's not interchangeable in any way or form. So even for the basic services, it's different. Sure, for basic services, it's a little bit less difficult to migrate. But again, if you do have a complete web solution with all your different rules that you have in terms of security, and you need to migrate this all to a different platform. Yeah, that will take time. And what you cannot do with security is, okay, I'm going to cut corners, because if that happens, well, the attackers will know. Let's put it that way. So, but it goes back to standardization. And again, that's one of the reasons why we set the CDN Alliance, is to make sure that we start talking the same language, that we make sure that we have these kind of standards to avoid these kind of issues in the future.
Mark, you know, we had on IO River, I think, more than 10 customers which use Edgio, and
Yep.
and for them, it was not issue at all. It was they did it. We just sent him in some point a message that listen, one of the providers, in this case it was Edgio, decided to shut down. We will reroute your traffic to other providers to ensure that nothing is, you will not be impacted. And that's it. It was, you know, they didn't feel anything. They didn't invest any efforts.
Mm-hmm.
The result of that, and it worked amazingly transparent for them. Do you think that you know, solutions like iRiver, like others, solutions that even customers could build in house, do you think it's the right approach, or it's too, I don't know, too complicated for at this point?
I think it really depends on the size of your company, right? And how much knowledge you have in house. I mean, if like earlier, if you are depending on CDNs, you typically have a team of people that are performance engineers that focus on CDN. They know what they need to do. So they will be able to prepare for that. But if it's not your core business, or your company that typically outsources most of their stuff, I mean, it just depends, right? I mean, if you look at broadcasters, I've seen the same thing happen. There was a CTO change of a company for broadcaster. First, they were running their own CDN, because the former CTO was focused on building their own CDN, get the technology in house, be independent, etc. The new CTO came in. I thought, okay, we're gonna do it differently. We're just gonna switch off our own build CDN. We're going back to third-party CDNs. It also depends on these kind of things that happen. So it's not like there is a golden rule. This is the way how to do it. It also depends on the company, depends on the people, depends on the nature of the company itself, right? Are you tech savvy? Is it tech savvy as a company or not? All kinds of different reasons what would make it happen. And for some, they can do it on their own. For some, it's much better to say, hey, I'll just outsource everything to a supplier that just takes care of it, like Agro River, and I don't have to worry about it.
I will just stop for a second and says that we are getting shorter in time. We're about 20 minutes to go. We will add another 10 minutes because we have some of the technical issues in the start, and we would love you to continue talking. Just a reminder for all the guys in the audience, we have a bottom here below says a Q&A. You can just click on it every time, and you can just share your question or share your thought if you have any, and we will love to address them. So here is like a short stop. And the next question that I have for you, Mark, is that you are a guy that known with a lot of experience in the media and broadcasting for many years. And it's pretty well known that media companies and streaming companies are probably the heavier CDN customers, even in 2025. And the question is if there is any media customer needs which still didn't addressed by the CDN providers, which still didn't solve yet.
In terms, so what kind of solution, what kind of services you mean in terms of what is?
Yeah, in terms of features, it could be like analytics or any. I guess, you know, also the streaming industry.
Yeah, so I'll give you very simple examples, and those are in development, right?
Okay.
Support for CMCD, We're looking at CMSD. These kind of analytics capabilities, have them at all the different CDNs out there. Common token authentication is another one. Some CDNs support it, not all of them. Those are things that should, in my opinion, be implemented everywhere. Again, from a media perspective. Other parts, that's more on the security side, and again, this goes very, very well in relation to edge compute. Is on the security side in terms of watermarking, in terms of DRM on the fly, tokenization on the fly, better capabilities for CDN leeching, all those capabilities that media companies are looking for, because piracy is one of the biggest issues that they have, and they would like to combat that as much as possible. And not all the CDNs have all the capabilities yet to really combat that in the right way. So those are certainly, for media companies, very interesting ones to look at. This. That's really more on the security side. On the edge compute side, there are more and more things happening in terms of dynamic manifesting capabilities, etc. And that's where edge compute are used for. Some pre-processing of analytics for data they get from clients, so QE type of capabilities directly computing on the edge. There are no standards for that yet, right? It's all independent per CDN, but those are features that people are certainly looking at. I can't hear you, Rui.
Oh, sorry for that. There is a question from the audience. We will address it in a second. This is one of the last question, and I went to ask this question you, because really had a lot of understanding in the market for many years. Do multi-CDN is the present or is the future?
Both. I mean, again, if we go back to media companies in general, 65% of all them already use multi-CDN today, right? All the big ones are doing it. Most, not all of them, most of them. It's pretty common to have this as a capability. Not so much, yes, on the enterprise side. So I still think there is a lot to be won on that particular area. Like I said, if you have for static content, so if it's just static content, whether it's media, whether it's static files, downloads, that kind of stuff, that's fairly easy to do on multi-CDN. However, once you go into the security domain, once you go into the edge compute domain, that's where it gets difficult. And I think there's still a lot to be won there in capabilities for multi-CDN, how you want to call it, multi-edge, multi-CDN. That's where still a lot of capabilities can be won, and that's where I see the future as well. Again, for delivery, yes, it's pretty common. For applications, for enterprise customers, etc. That's where the future is.
Okay. Eddie, do you want to elaborate that?
Yeah, no, I think the Mark message is extremely clear. I wanted to ask you last question from my perspective, Mark, to get your to get your perspective on that. With all the global political winds that we are experiencing in our world, when from one side we see what happens with TikTok in US, from another side we see that Akamai is kind of planning to stop their service in China. All the situation in the Middle East, in Ukraine, Russia, and many different regulations that going inside many of the countries. How
Yes.
all things will impact on our open world of the internet?
Yeah, this will have an impact. So a couple of things that are happening. One element is regulation in terms of just having control, right? So governments wanting having some sort of control, and some of it is logical, right? To give you a very simple example, right now, if there is a major incident in a country, most of the people that will go up will use our OTT service to watch, hey, what's going on. And a lot of if there's really a major issue, and everybody starts watching at the same time because of that particular issue, because they want to get the information, it might well be that the internet in that particular country is going to have some issues because they are just not capable of doing that. Once that happens, there will be regulation at some point by governments that want to have control. Hey, if it's a major thing happening where we need to inform our citizens, we need to have control that we can actually deliver, right? Which with regular broadcast, that is not really an issue, but OTT has not been made that way. That's one. So that's a regulation that I think is a feasible one and a realistic one to happen, especially if, and again, if you look at it from a European standpoint, for example, if most of the services that are responsible for the delivery are non-European. That's a big element. The second element is everything in relation to privacy and security, right? So those become more and more of a challenge. Privacy needs to be local for whatever reasons. We don't have to want the data stored in a different continent, et cetera, et cetera. We don't want to have it processed in a different continent. Those are the elements. And the third one is in relation to digital islands, I want to call it, where there is a trend where companies want to make sure that everything they do stays within one single particular country. That means for a CDN, yes, you can have a global network itself, but delivery is local, compute might be local, storage might be local, everything might be local. Where now, for instance, a lot of stuff could be used across all kinds of different elements, different continents, different countries, etc. That might change over time, just because they want to protect on what they're doing, for whatever reason.
Mark, my feeling that with these changes in the world, multi-edge will play important role, because multi-edge is practically it's a virtual solution, which not hold infrastructures, and can play with multiple players and allow to each one of the players kind of build his own regulations and own control, and still provide to to us as a people that consume the internet a totally transparent um, experience like we have today.
Mm-hmm.
We have one question from the audience before we move to the final question. And there's a guy here, Jeremy, is asking, what are your thoughts on how multi-CDN solution providers like iRiver can work together with the network owners, CDNs or local CDNs, to create a win-win for all three together, with the customer like big management, etc. You can both, by the way, answer that. I guess you both have like enough understanding.
Mark, do you want to start, or you want me
Yeah,
to?
I can do it, but I'll take it from an industry perspective. So one of the things, what issues have, what issues are, what CDNs are having in general is, one, they don't like capex, so they don't want to invest highly in peak infrastructure, right? That's what CDNs don't like, because it's you have capacity available, but you rarely use it except when there's a peak. Doesn't make a lot of sense. It's just wasting money. And again, if you even look at it from an environmental standpoint, sustainability standpoint, it's a waste of resources. So CDNs don't like that peak, those peaks. So if they can avoid the peaks, that would be the best option, right? So then if you have a multi-CDN, then hey, if you can lower the peaks across the different CDNs by using different CDNs at the same time, that could actually be beneficial for CDNs in general. So that's one element. The second element, and that's more towards a player like iRiver, is what we also see with multi-CDN environments by customers is they switch between different CDNs very sudden. For instance, hey, I want to use the traffic first here because that's a cheap traffic, and then I want to move to somewhere else. And then all of a sudden, that traffic shifts from CDN A to CDN B. And all of a sudden, CDN B gets a shitload of traffic. All of a sudden, it's like, I wasn't prepared for that. And normally it gradually gets up or whatever. And the other one, it all of a sudden has a lot less traffic for whatever reason. That's not something that CDNs would like to. CDNs love predictability. So if there's a way of working together between CDNs on one end and multi-CDN players like iRiver, then that would also be a topic. Okay, how can we make sure that we more gradually and don't go flip-flopping between the different CDNs back and forth, because that's not helping the CDN ecosystem as a whole. And again, this is also the same for the ISPs downstream, right? Because if you look at ISPs and they're interconnected, they have the same issue. All of a sudden, CDNA is pushing all that traffic into a network, and then poof, now all of a sudden CDNB is pushing all the traffic through different routes. What is happening here? Right. So having a good mechanism on those, I think, would be very beneficial in terms of peaks, and the fact that it's the sudden changes in traffic patterns.
So, Mark, I totally agree with you. And honestly, you know, what you're describing from my perspective is not the future. It's happening already today. We are already today, for example, again, I can talk from our Riverside perspective. We're already today working close with the edge providers, exactly for this to try and build more predictable, you know, low traffic load on these providers, and also allow them to leverage to handle better the peaks, but also handle better the expansions. Because if you think about that, for edge vendors to start and deploy new capabilities in some geolocation, should be enough demand, should be enough justification to do it. And then it's kind of chicken and egg, because at the beginning he don't have probably enough demand, and then he building some infrastructure that is it's not it's too much infrastructure for the amount of traffic, and using collaboration with solutions like iRiver, and we are already in discussion with these things with the vendors. We could easily solve it. You could build the infrastructure. We will be able to guarantee amount of traffic in this infrastructure. We'll be able to use traffic in the infrastructure which is not doesn't have enough demand yet, and then with the growth of demand, to balance the traffic better between the vendors. So I think it's definitely super interesting directions. I think that the collaboration between iRiver and the similar solutions that will, I'm sure that will show up in the future with the edge providers is definitely a key, and we must have this communication. And I think that CDN Alliance might play important role here, because many of the edge providers, definitely multi-edge providers, are part of CDN Alliance, and we might think how we can push it forward.
Always willing to look into that, of course.
Okay, so one last question before we finish, and it's about, of course, the most spoken topic, Gen AI. How do you see the impact of Gen AI on the CDN space?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it a little bit earlier as well in one of my earlier questions. So Gen AI. So if you look at personalization in general, and I think that's where a lot of the content will be going, whether this is text, whether this is images, whether this is video, it will be more and more personalized. And instead of sending that around in all kinds of different ways from A to B, if it's generated somewhere and then send over to the end location, the end user at a particular location, you want to have that generation much closer to the end user. And that's where edge compute, capabilities come into play to generate that close by the users. I mean, it goes back to basically the old principle of how CDN started, is getting the publications closer to the users. For distribution, that's where it started, right? With just delivery domain. Now the same thing is happening on the edge side. So basically, I wouldn't say it's full circle, but similar things are happening now on the compute side in comparison to what was done on the delivery side with CDNs 25 years ago.
I see. Okay. Thank you guys for joining us, and thank you, Mark. It was a pleasure to having you here and share with us those precious knowledge. And thank, of course, to Edward, who joined us from US. And see you next time in the next webinar. I hope you enjoyed, and feel free to ask us more questions on LinkedIn or on the email. We'll be more than happy to elaborate on the topics that we discuss here. Thank you, guys, and have a great week. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Mark.